The sound hit them first, a distant buzz growing louder. Then the silhouettes appeared against the morning sky, strange shapes with twin tails cutting through the clouds above New Guinea. Ground crews squinted upward from Port Moresby. These weren't the familiar outlines they knew, not the stubby P-40s, not the aging P-39s. Something entirely different was prowling the Pacific skies. Minutes ticked by in nervous silence. Radio chatter crackled through static. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Japanese formations were approaching from the north. Zeros, Oscars, Vals. The same aircraft that had dominated every engagement for over a year. Veterans of Pearl Harbor flew those machines, masters of the turning fight who had never met their match. But December 27, 1942, would be different. High above the jungle canopy, those strange twin-tailed fighters were positioning for something unprecedented. A new kind of battle was about to begin. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning wasn't just entering combat. It was rewriting the rules of aerial warfare forever. For 13 brutal months, Japanese pilots had owned the sky. Their Mitsubishi A6M-0 represented perfection in aerial combat. Light as a feather, quick as a striking snake. Deadly in the hands of expertly trained aviators. American pilots had learned painful lessons trying to match them. The P-39 Airacobra couldn't climb high enough. The P-40 Warhawk couldn't turn tight enough. Every dogfight became a death sentence when facing the Zero's supernatural agility. Traditional combat meant spiraling inward until one fighter gained position behind another. The Zero excelled at this dance. Its turning radius defied physics. Its climb rate embarrassed every Allied aircraft in the Pacific. Japanese naval doctrine had crafted these machines for decisive battle. Air power existed to shield the fleet. Eliminate threats before they could reach Japanese shores. Elite pilots trained relentlessly in aerobatics and precision gunnery. By late 1941, they represented the most formidable fighter force on Earth. American doctrine struggled with outdated thinking. Fighters were seen as bomber escorts rather than independent hunters. Training emphasized formation flying over individual combat skills. The results in the Philippines and Dutch East Indies proved catastrophic. Something revolutionary was needed. An aircraft that could challenge Japanese supremacy. A philosophy that could overcome their advantages. That revolution was already taking shape in California. Lockheed engineers led by Clarence Kelly Johnson envisioned a fighter unlike anything before. 2 engines instead of 1. All guns concentrated in the nose rather than scattered across wings. A machine built for vertical combat rather than horizontal turning. The concept seemed almost absurd. Critics called it ungainly. A flying aberration. Yet every strange line served a purpose in this new philosophy of war. Twin Allison V-1710 engines provided unprecedented power. Each delivered over 1,000 horsepower. Turbochargers fed them compressed air at altitudes where other fighters gasped for breath. Maximum speed exceeded 400 miles per hour. Service ceiling reached above 4,000 feet. Heights unthinkable for a Zero. 4 heavy Browning machine guns and 1 20mm cannon clustered in the nose. This configuration eliminated convergence problems that plagued wing-mounted weapons. Every bullet and shell followed the same path. Accuracy improved dramatically. Range extended to hundreds of yards, but raw specifications told only part of the story. The Lightning represented a fundamental shift in combat philosophy. American doctrine began evolving under its shadow. Instead of horizontal spirals where Zeros ruled supreme, P-38 pilots trained for vertical battles. Climb high. Dive with crushing speed. Unleash concentrated firepower. climb again before the enemy could react. The Zero's advantages became weaknesses in this new arena. Its light construction couldn't handle high-speed dives. Structural failure threatened anyone foolish enough to chase a Lightning downward. Attempting to climb after diving fighters led to stalls and helplessness. Training reflected this revolution. New squadrons drilled endlessly on boom and zoom tactics, high-speed yo-yos, barrel rolls that preserved energy while maintaining firing solutions. The mantra became sacred among Lightning pilots. Altitude is life insurance. Speed is life. Never turn with a zero. Discipline meant survival. Those who obeyed lived to fight again. By late 1942, Richard Bong joined the 39th Fighter Squadron carrying these new doctrines. The young farm boy from Wisconsin studied not just how the Lightning flew, he analyzed how the enemy thought. Japanese pilots were masters of close-range duels. They stalked opponents' tails, finished with short bursts from lightweight guns. Bong understood that denying them the turning fight wasted their skill entirely. In the P-38, he could dictate every engagement: when to attack, when to escape, when to climb back into the sun for another strike. Each Lightning improvement sharpened its edge further. New models added stronger engines, refined turbo systems, hydraulically boosted controls that made the big fighter surprisingly agile at high speed. By 1943, P-38J and L variants could roll, dive, and climb with fluidity that erased Japanese advantages entirely. Technology had leaped forward a generation in 12 months. For pilots, the Lightning became weapon and shield combined. Twin engines meant safety on long missions across endless ocean. Single-engine fighters meant death if power plants failed. Extended range with drop tanks allowed escort missions deeper into Japanese territory than any other American fighter could reach. Rugged frames absorbed punishment that would shatter lighter aircraft. Men climbing into Lightning cockpits knew they possessed not just the chance to fight. They had the tools to survive. What began as strange sketches on drawing boards had become the harbinger of aerial revolution. In skies over the Solomons and New Guinea, vertical battlefield doctrine would soon face its ultimate test. When steel met sky, the P-38 Lightning would prove itself more than just another fighter. It was the instrument of transformation itself. The first Lightning missions carried little glory that history would later attach. Late 1942 found the 39th Fighter Squadron simply learning to trust their new machines. Each takeoff from steel matting at Port Moresby tested nerves and engines alike. The Lightning was massive, heavier than any fighter they had flown. Its twin booms demanded runway precision that single-engine aircraft never required. Yet once airborne, the sensation of power became unmistakable. Pilots quickly realized this wasn't another fragile machine requiring delicate handling. This was a predator built to stalk the sky with confidence. Early sorties consisted of routine patrols, long hours scanning ocean and jungle canopy for enemy signs. Many days passed without contact. Sweat pooled inside cockpits as tropical sun baked canopy glass until air shimmered like water. Pilots fought drowsiness and boredom. Their only companions were the steady thrum of Allison engines and faint smell of oil seeping through seals. Ground crews worked tirelessly between missions, patching bullet holes from anti-aircraft fire, checking delicate turbocharger systems, keeping Lightnings in fighting trim despite humidity that corroded everything metal. Life at the Pacific front edge followed rhythms of waiting, training, and sudden violence. Japanese pilots viewed these new machines with curiosity rather than alarm. Rumors spread through squadrons about American reconnaissance aircraft, perhaps heavy fighters. Not true adversaries worthy of serious concern. Some dismissed them entirely as desperate experiments. December 27th shattered those illusions completely. Captain Thomas Lynch led 12 Lightnings into steep dives through morning clouds. In less than 10 minutes, the myth of Japanese aerial invincibility cracked wide open. Zeros attempting to follow shook violently. Wings approached structural limits. Those trying to climb after Lightnings found themselves stalling. Helpless targets for Americans who simply looped back down for another pass. From that moment, the Lightning's journey shifted from proving itself to dominating everything in its path. Each mission revealed more of its character. Escorting bombers over New Guinea, P-38s climbed higher than Japanese interceptors could reach. Drop tanks provided endurance to shadow-lumbering B-24s across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. When Japanese formations rose to intercept, Lightnings struck like hawks from unreachable altitudes, scattering enemies before a single bomber was touched. Combat survival demanded iron discipline from pilots. Training warnings about never turning with zeros became sacred law in actual fighting. Any pilot giving into instinct risked losing aircraft and life together. Instead, they attacked with calculated precision. Dive, fire, climb, reset. Each engagement followed this pattern without deviation. Lieutenant Richard Bong embodied this doctrine perfectly. His patience in holding fire until the exact moment. His skill at deflection shooting. His instinct for positioning made him uniquely lethal. Within weeks, he scored first victories. Soon the name Bong carried weight across every briefing room in the Pacific Theater. Combat exacted human costs despite tactical advantages. Losses still occurred. Engines failed over empty ocean. Navigation went astray in tropical weather. Japanese ambushes struck from hidden cloud banks. Pilots failing to return left empty bunks and grieving squadron mates. Tropical climate ate away at machines and men with equal hunger. Malaria swept through units. Jungle rot afflicted ground crews laboring barefoot in mud and endless rain. Yet successful missions reinforced bonds between pilot and aircraft. The Lightning became more than riveted steel and aluminum. It transformed into a shield against relentless Japanese pressure. By early 1943, the Lightning established itself as proven rather than experimental. Longlegs carried it deep into contested airspace. Concentrated guns tore apart bombers and fighters alike. Speed allowed disengagement at will whenever tactical situations deteriorated. Japanese after-action reports, once filled with triumphant language, now spoke of frustration and disbelief. Officers struggled to explain how air superiority was slipping from their grasp. Skies over New Guinea and the Solomons, once painted with graceful arcs of zero dogfights, were transforming into vertical battlegrounds. Altitude and speed ruled supreme in these new arenas. The journey had barely begun. Already the P-38 was rewriting the entire story of Pacific air warfare. Combat's true measure came in crucible moments where entire campaigns balanced on razor edges. Early 1943 found Allied fortunes in the Southwest Pacific hanging uncertainly. Japanese air power still prowled contested skies with confidence. Their bombers pounded Allied positions at will. Zero fighters waited to pounce on any American machine bold enough to climb above 15,000 feet. For more than a year, Imperial Navy aviators had fought with complete impunity. Doctrines that never failed them guided every engagement. When Lightnings appeared in meaningful numbers, the balance began tilting toward revolution. January 7, 1943, delivered undeniable proof of change. 9 P-38s lifted from Port Moresby to escort B-25 bomber formations. Japanese forces sent 25 fighters to intercept. Logic suggested Americans would be overwhelmed completely. Instead, Lightnings climbed to 25,000 feet, beyond reach of their adversaries, then plunged downward like falling stars, unleashed from heaven itself. Lieutenant Richard Bong dove from the sun's glare. His deflection shot shattered an Oscar with a single precise burst. As Japanese pilots scrambled desperately to climb toward him, Bong executed a chandelle that carried his fighter back to altitude advantage. Within moments, he was positioned again for another devastating strike. The engagement lasted mere minutes. Its impact rippled through both sides like earthquake tremors. Americans had discovered a weapon capable of dictating battle terms completely. Strategic consequences emerged not from isolated dogfights, but from battles carrying campaign-level importance. March 1943 brought the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The Lightning's value was proven beyond any question. Allied bombers targeted a Japanese convoy bound for Leh. 8 transports escorted by destroyers carried desperately needed reinforcements. As waves of B-25s and Beaufighters bore down on the convoy, Zero squadrons rose in desperate defense. Overhead, P-38 formations swept down in coordinated vertical attacks. They tore through escort fighters, scattering them before they could engage the bombers effectively. In resulting chaos, Allied bombers unleashed devastating low-level skip-bombing runs. The sea transformed into an inferno of burning fuel and twisted metal. 8 transports and 4 destroyers were sent to the bottom. Japanese attempts to reinforce New Guinea were crippled for months. Without lightning protection, Allied bombers would have been shredded long before reaching their targets. Instead, the battle became a decisive Allied victory purchased with P-38 air superiority. If the Bismarck Sea represented strategic victory, April 18, 1943 showcased precision and audacity combined. Code breakers had intercepted Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's travel itinerary. Architect of Pearl Harbor and Japan's most brilliant naval strategist was flying from Rabaul to Bougainville for inspection tours. Intercepting him demanded absolute perfection. 435 miles of overwater flight from Guadalcanal. Radio silence throughout the mission. Dead reckoning navigation over featureless ocean. Only the P-38 possessed range and speed necessary for such an ambitious undertaking. 16 Lightnings of the 339th Fighter Squadron took off at dawn under Major John Mitchell's leadership. They flew at wave-top height with engines humming just above sea spray. Unseen by Japanese radar installations, after more than 2 hours of precise navigation, they reached the calculated intercept point exactly on schedule. At 09:34 hours, Yamamoto's 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers appeared, flying with 6 Zero escorts exactly as intelligence had predicted. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber dove into attack formation. Within seconds, Barber's concentrated firepower ripped into Yamamoto's bomber. The aircraft spiraled helplessly into jungle below. Japan's supreme naval commander was dead. Psychological shock reverberated throughout Japanese military hierarchy. No leader was supposed to be vulnerable to enemy action. Yet here stood proof that American fighters could reach across the Pacific with surgical precision. For Japanese aviators, the skies no longer felt safe from American reach. For Americans, the mission became a symbol of vengeance, proof that war's tide was shifting in their favor. By late 1943, Lightnings appeared everywhere Japanese forces looked. Squadrons equipped with P-38s struck Rabaul repeatedly. They shattered Japanese defenses over New Guinea systematically, extended their operational reach into the Bismarck archipelago. Captain Thomas Lynch refined vertical tactics into high art. He scored 20 victories before his death in 1944. Richard Bong climbed methodically toward becoming America's top ace. August 1943 brought another name into the pantheon of lightning legends. Thomas Maguire's aggressive flying style and tactical innovations turned him into Bong's rival and equal competitor. Between them, they authored new doctrines of vertical combat. Their techniques became required study for squadrons across the theater. The barrel roll attack, the high-speed yo-yo, the Maguire roll. Each maneuver was documented and taught to incoming pilots. Japanese response bordered on complete desperation. Reports instructed pilots to avoid engaging P-38s above 15,000 feet unless possessing overwhelming numerical advantage. Even then, attacks were to be swift, with immediate disengagement afterward. The proud Zero, once the symbol of invincibility, had been reduced to cautious defensive operations. New aircraft were rushed into service. The Ki-61 Tony, the Ki-44 Shoki, later the Ki-84 Frank. None arrived in numbers sufficient to alter the fundamental balance of power. Pilots who once exulted in outmaneuvering opponents now wrote of nightmares. Twin boom shadows diving from unreachable altitudes haunted their sleep. Some requested transfers to ground units rather than face Lightnings again. Every major battle added to the Lightning's growing reputation. November 1943 saw American P-38s sweep Solomon skies so thoroughly that Japanese daylight operations virtually ceased entirely. Ships moved only under cover of darkness. Supplies reached front lines by submarine or destroyer runs. The empire that once stretched confidently across the Pacific was being strangled from the air. Lifelines were severed by relentless lightning patrols operating around the clock. For men flying these missions, victories carried heavy prices. Flights stretched across hundreds of miles of empty ocean. Mechanical failure meant death by drowning or capture if rescue failed. Combat was sudden and brutal. Seconds of violence followed by hours of solitude over endless water. Yet the Lightning inspired confidence among its pilots. They spoke of its strength, its forgiving nature in dives, its ability to bring them home even on one engine when the other failed. Each victory represented not only technological triumph, but personal survival against overwhelming odds. By dawn of 1944, the Pacific Air War had transformed completely. Horizontal spirals of early campaigns were gone forever. In their place stretched vertical duels where altitude and energy dictated fate absolutely. The Lightning had proven itself not merely a participant in this transformation, it was the decisive blade that cut through Japanese air power entirely. The climax had arrived. With it came the end of Japanese dominance in Pacific skies. Months following the Lightning's rise proved devastating for Japanese air power beyond any previous measure. Reports arriving at Rabaul and Tokyo painted increasingly grim pictures of aerial combat results. Squadrons once returning in triumph were coming home shattered. Many were not returning at all. Familiar patterns of combat had vanished completely. Horizontal turning duels that defined Japanese doctrine were extinct. In their place stretched new battlefields defined by altitude, speed, and concentrated firepower. Terrain where Zeros and their pilots could no longer compete effectively. Casualties mounted with alarming speed that shocked Japanese commanders. The 201st Air Group began 1943 with 80 seasoned pilots. By year's end, only 10 remained operational. The 204th Air Group lost 70% of its aviators in 6 months of fighting over New Guinea alone. The 582nd was withdrawn entirely after losing 4 out of 5 aircraft within weeks. Japan's ability to replace these catastrophic losses was crippled by shortages. Aluminum became scarce. Fuel supplies dwindled. Engine production faltered under bombing pressure. Training pipelines that once produced masters of aerobatic combat were cut to mere months. Novices entered combat with barely 100 flight hours total. Many had never flown above 20,000 feet before meeting P-38s in actual battle. Against veterans armed with superior machines, they became lambs led to slaughter. For American pilots, the contrast was stark and undeniable. Losses certainly occurred. Mechanical failures, accidents, occasional ambushes. But the balance remained sustainable throughout. Air-sea rescue operations plucked survivors from ocean waters, returned them to duty within weeks of being shot down. Damaged Lightnings were patched and flown again. Rugged frames absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lighter aircraft completely. Industrial might ensured every aircraft lost was replaced many times over. By March 1943, Lockheed was producing 10 new P-38s every single day. By year's end, more than 2,000 had entered combat service across all theaters. Psychological consequences ran deeper than raw numbers could measure. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, American pilots flew with genuine confidence. They knew they possessed decisive advantages. That knowledge emboldened aggressive fighting that would have been suicide in earlier aircraft. Altitude is life insurance became more than a training phrase. It transformed into a creed that turned fear into disciplined action. Missions once seeming like desperate gambles became opportunities for victory. The Lightning gave its pilots not just survival tools, it provided mastery over their enemies. Japanese pilots experienced the opposite psychological transformation. Despair seeped into letters and personal diaries. Captured documents revealed aviators haunted by nightmares. Twin-tailed demons diving from the sun appeared in their sleep. Some described feelings of complete helplessness. Firing bursts that fell short as Lightnings simply vanished upward into untouchable altitude. Others requested transfers to ground duty rather than continue fighting enemies who refused to engage by traditional rules. For a warrior culture built on honor and aggressive action, shifting to defensive fleeting attacks represented humiliation as profound as the losses themselves. The battlefield adjusted to these new realities accordingly. By late 1943, Japanese daylight operations in the Solomons had virtually ceased. Convoys moved only under cover of darkness. Supplies that once traveled openly across broad daylight now crept forward by submarine. Or destroyer runs under cover of night. The once proud naval air force that architected Pearl Harbor and conquered the early Pacific had been reduced to defensive shadows of its former power. Each defeat widened the gulf between opposing forces. Each Lightning victory pressed the knife deeper into Japanese air superiority. For the Allies, consequences were strategic as well as tactical. The Lightning's exceptional range allowed bombers to strike targets once considered completely untouchable. Reconnaissance variants mapped enemy positions with absolute impunity. Air superiority, once seeming like an impossible dream, was becoming measurable reality. Japanese forces could no longer protect their bases effectively. Their fleets operated without air cover. Even their senior leaders traveled at mortal risk. Admiral Yamamoto's death symbolized this fundamental shift. No one remained beyond the Lightning's operational reach. The aftermath encompassed not only Japanese air power collapse, it opened entirely new chapters in the Pacific War's progression. With skies secured, Allied ground forces advanced rapidly. Supply lines flowed without interruption. Operations that would have been impossible under Zero shadows became inevitable under Lightning protection. Consequences were measured not just in aircraft destroyed. Entire campaigns turned from doubt toward certain victory. The Zero had entered the war as a living legend. By end of 1943, it had become a dangerous relic, still deadly in expert hands, still capable of inflicting damage, but no longer master of Pacific skies. The Lightning had claimed that crown decisively. The cost to Japan was nothing short of catastrophic. The reward to America was not only air dominance, it was unstoppable momentum that would carry Allied forces across the Pacific toward ultimate victory. When the Pacific War finally drew toward its conclusion, the P-38 Lightning had already carved its permanent place in military history. More than simply another fighter aircraft, it had served as harbinger of a new age in aerial combat philosophy. Between December 1942 and January 1945, Lightning squadrons claimed over 1,500 confirmed victories in the Southwest Pacific Theater. They lost fewer than 200 of their own aircraft in return. The kill ratio of 7-to-1 spoke not only to the aircraft's raw power, it testified to the revolutionary doctrine and iron discipline forged around its capabilities. Yet the Lightning's legacy cannot be measured purely in statistical terms. It fundamentally changed the psychology of aerial warfare itself. Japanese pilots who entered the conflict with supreme confidence came to dread the twin-tailed silhouette diving from solar glare. Their dominance, once unquestioned, was shattered by a machine that fought in 3 dimensions rather than 2. American aviators, once consistently outmatched, discovered through the Lightning an entirely new sense of aerial mastery. The sky was no longer an arena of desperation and survival. It had become a domain of control and confident aggression. For individual pilots, the Lightning became inseparable from their legendary reputations. Richard Bong, achieving 40 aerial victories, remains America's highest-scoring ace of all time. Thomas Maguire, with 38 victories, codified tactics that became standard doctrine for subsequent generations. Countless others, though less celebrated in popular history, wrote their own heroic chapters within Lightning cockpits. Their collective experiences shaped not only the Pacific War's outcome, they influenced the identity of the U.S. Army Air Forces as it transformed into the modern Air Force. The aircraft's influence extended far beyond immediate battlefields of World War II. Post-war jet designs carried forward lessons first proven in Lightning combat. Speed and altitude remained paramount considerations. Concentrated firepower became standard configuration. Energy management emerged as the key to victory in aerial combat. From the F-86 Sabre over Korean skies to the multi-role fighters of the modern jet age, echoes of P-38 philosophy endured in every design decision, in every climb toward the stratosphere. In every dive through thin air of high-altitude combat, the vertical battlefield pioneered by the Lightning remained vibrantly alive. Even decades after the war's end, its image commands profound awe. Restored Lightnings fly at air shows across the nation, their twin booms gleaming in sunlight, engines roaring like thunder across fields of fascinated spectators. Museums preserve their stories with reverent care. Veterans who once trusted their lives to Lightning steel frames recall the confidence it provided them. The aircraft gave them not just tools for combat, it offered genuine hope for survival and victory. On Pacific Islands, wrecked Lightnings still lie in dense jungles and coral lagoons, silent testaments to the ferocity of battles once fought in those remote places. For people who discover them today, local villagers, military historians, curious travelers, they represent relics of a moment when the world's entire future hung in precarious balance. The lasting meaning of the P-38 Lightning extends beyond its record of winning battles. It proved that technology, industrial capacity, and tactical doctrine combined could overcome even the most formidable opponents. It demonstrated that courage and innovation married together effectively, could break established legends and build entirely new ones in their place. In the final analysis, the Lightning's legacy embodies both triumph and warning. Air supremacy belongs not to tradition or cultural pride. It belongs to those who adapt fastest to changing conditions, who reach highest in pursuit of advantage, who strike hardest when opportunity presents itself. The twin-boom fighter that once shocked Japanese pilots over the Solomon Islands remains, to this day, a powerful symbol. It represents how swiftly the tides of war can turn, how quickly dominance can shift from one side to another, how decisive the marriage of technology and tactics can become in determining the fate of nations. The Lightning didn't just win battles in the Pacific. It rewrote the fundamental rules of aerial combat forever. And in doing so, it changed the course of history itself.